Thank you for having us, Microsoft, with you here, Julian, and Ulf, and Iprova team. I usually like to start with a funny story. A funny story that shows you how AI has drastically changed. Julian has heard the story before, so if he doesn't laugh, it's actually not. So my first encounter with AI was in about year 2000. I was working in the Office product team at that time, integrating speech recognition within Office. And speech recognition within Office could be used in two ways. You could use dictation, so you say, for example, you say a letter or an email, and it would type what you would say. Or you could do command and control. You say file, the file menu drops, you say open, the open dialog opens, and so on and so forth. Office is, at that time, was about a 2.5 years cycle. And as you know, in any software engineering cycle, you don't change the code 2-3 weeks before the end of the product, before the release of the product. And surprise, 3-4 weeks before the release of the product, somebody finds a severity 1 bug in my feature, speech command and control. Panic. What is that severity 1 bug? Turned out that the bug was if you turn speech command and control on in Outlook and you sneeze, the probability of it being recognized as send was high. Panic, what do? We need to try to reproduce the bug. Right? So everybody within the hallway of the Office product cycle at that time was sneezing. And indeed, the probability was high. Panic, it's actually reproducible, the bug. What do? Triage meeting. Imagine you're writing an email with a few insults, a draft, and then you sneeze, the email goes out before you can delete the insult. It's bad. So we ended up cutting the shortcut send. So you can sneeze as much as you want, nothing will happen. Now, between that type of productivity and that type of accuracy and where we are today, in terms of expectations out of AI, where 87% of surveyed enterprise leaders believe that AI will have a major competitive edge, things have drastically changed. We're talking about 24 years, right? Things have drastically changed. And indeed, computers beat humans in many cognitive skills. So that's a major change in terms of the power of the technology, but also in terms of the expectations. And it's not just organizational leaders' expectations, employees actually expect it as well. So every year, we have a survey within Microsoft called the Work Trend Index, which we run in about 30 plus countries based on a lot of signals of how the product is being used, but also based on hiring trends within LinkedIn. And what we see is pretty interesting. 64% of surveyed employees actually lack the time and the energy to be able to do properly their job. They have what we call the digital debt. They're overwhelmed with information, overwhelmed, with content, and so on and so forth. And that has a direct impact in their ability to innovate. They see themselves as being 3.5 more times struggle to innovate. And that's why they see AI as an ally. Initially, when Gen AI came out, people were thinking, people are scared, it will take over their jobs. But actually now 70% of employees are willing to delegate as much as possible to AI, to be more productive, to focus on high added value activities. So employees are embracing AI and they see AI as an ally. And what do they actually want from AI? They want very simple things. The ability to find information and answers, right? So for example, I was in a meeting, in a call 2 weeks ago, Elisa presented the deck, can you find it, right? A search engine cannot do that. With a Gen AI infused productivity set, you can do that. It will find you the deck that was presented by Elisa in that meeting 2 weeks ago. Finding information and answers, summarizing meetings and action items, creative work, right, as well. So for example, a marketing agency creating a draft of an initial Instagram post, for example. Analytical work, planning their day and admin tasks. All those are expectations that employees expect from AI in order to boost their productivity. Now, basically what they want is they're expecting that it reasons with and acts upon content, right? That's what the expectation, that it is able to deal with content, create content, summarize content, and so on and so forth. But none of that would matter if the basics are not right, if it's not built on firm principles. principles around security and privacy. Your data remains your data as an end user. Your data is not used to train the models behind, right? Be it Azure OpenAI models or others. It's not used to train the models behind, and it's protected, right? So for example, if I create a document using generative AI and the source of information for that document was highly sensitive, I'm expecting that the document generated is also highly sensitive. So it has to mimic the sensitive labels. So data is protected is also a firm principle. Similarly, besides security and privacy, ethics and responsible AI are firm principles that needs to be not only within the product strategy, right, but also ingrained within the technology itself. Do you have the proper level of guardrails within the technology to avoid, for example, a response or certain prompts? Those firm principles are critical in any product engineering that is infused with AI, but also when enterprises actually adopt AI-infused tools. If we go back to our perspective on what they expect is that it deals with content, that content has to be wide, but also has to be able to tap into targeted knowledge. Once it taps into that content, it needs to have the ability to surface specific skills, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then last but not least, for it to work, it has to be in the flow of work, right? For it to impact my productivity, for example, if I'm in Outlook sending an email, I should be able to be there and directly use Gen AI. And from a Microsoft perspective, what we see basically is that we see those Gen AI infused moments, Gen AI infused tools surfacing throughout the flow of work of the different types of personas that exist in an enterprise. A seller, a contact center agent, an engineer, right? This is what we hear as well today. It has to be, surfacing those Gen AI infused moments in the day of life of this persona. And for that to be productive, it has to tap into two types of knowledge. Information worker knowledge, which is the emails you send, the documents you have access to, right? PowerPoint decks, the meetings you've been to, only the things that you have access to. So information worker knowledge. And it has to be able to tap into what I was saying before, more targeted knowledge. So for example, if I'm a seller or a sales leader, I should be able to go into Outlook and I want to send, for example, an email to my management team saying, can you summarize my top 5 opportunities in the next 3 months for this customer? It has access on the left-hand side to the CRM, and it has access, to the type of wording that I use in my emails on the right-hand side. And then it's able to combine both to have a real Gen AI infused productivity task, and that's the type of skills I was referring to before. Now, this is why we see, as I was saying, a series of copilots being infused in the life of different types of personas. And the core of that is Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365, which is leveraging the innovation that comes with large language models, has access to the knowledge graph that you have access to, right? Only the information that you have access to. So it gets infused and grounded in the emails you have access to, in the documents you have access to. It applies the right level of protection. So similar to the example I was giving before, you generate a document, it keeps the sensitivity labels. And it actually can also be extended through Copilot Studio. The power of this, I get back from vacation, I have 500 emails. I just went off 2 days, 500 emails, that sounds familiar. I want Copilot to create a summary of my emails and to point me to the most urgent task. It can do that. It has access to the emails I have access to. It's impersonating myself, and only the Copilot have access to that, right? And then it creates me what it believes I should focus on. Similarly, we extend the Copilot to business functions, right? So this is what I was saying, it can targeted knowledge. So for example, a CRM or a knowledge base for a contact center agent. So this is where we see copilots for specific functions. Copilot for sales, for example, would have access to the enterprise CRM. No matter what your CRM is, it would have access to that, impersonating the seller. And then it can do the type of scenarios that I was describing before, creating an email with a summary of my top opportunities. And the impact is actually real, both in terms of adoption, that, for example, a seller day in the life using those different types of co-pilot moments throughout the day. So if I'm a seller, for example, I get an email from a customer, I can get a summary of that email, a summary of that thread, many times, many pages long. I can go and create a proposal in Word or in Outlook. I can summarize a team meeting and so on and so forth. It's all of those moments that you have throughout the day in the life that translate into a real impact. If we take a contact center agent, for example, that is able to have a summary of the call live with the customer, maybe getting some guidance on how to treat that case, all this will surface up to the key impact that is critical for our contact center, which is the average handling time of the case. And what we see as an example of an impact within Microsoft, within our own contact centers, is we're able to reduce up to 16% the average time needed to handle a case with the same or even higher level of quality. Now, to do that, we help customers basically in three ways. One is to leverage and unblock productivity with the built-in copilots or the ready-to-use copilots, like the copilots from Microsoft 365. Building your own capabilities in terms of having the creation of your own copilots or the extension of your own copilots. And for that, we rely a lot on partners like iProva. iProva, and I'll describe that in a moment, for example, think about that as a co-pilot for invention and co-pilot for engineers. It brings you the right level of AI and Gen AI infused skills in the right moment in the day in the life of that engineer or R&D person. And then last but not least, for helping enterprises to do that, and our partners as well, like iProva, it's critical to have that right level of responsible AI technology, such as safeguards, built into the technology. Now, what about R&D? So I described, the life of a seller. I described the life of a contact center agent. What type of Gen AI infused moments do we see in sample use cases we see in R&D? Our newly joined Mustafa Sulaiman, he's the CEO of Microsoft AI division. I think I love this quote because it really tells you that AI is opening the door to an infinite amount of invention, infinite amount of productivity of inventors. Now, let's look at some examples of what it could mean. It can help you in terms of creating ideas, right? Coming up with ideas for brand new concepts. Within Microsoft, and I'll describe that into more details, we use Gen AI to synthesize personas, create virtual personas that allows you to test marketing messages. It's helping you as well to create brand new product concepts very quickly, potentially building a prototype. So for example, a developer could use GitHub Copilot to generate the majority amount of the code that is needed for an MVP or prototype and boosting up their productivity. Helping you in patent research and market validation. Let's deep dive into one sample persona. So within our marketing team, within Microsoft, we have a research and insight team that has basically developed what you see here, which is a Gen AI infused audience assistant. What does it do? It taps onto hundreds and thousands of survey data, which are in different formats, CSV files and others, right? And then it creates synthesized personas that you can interact with. It has a lot of impacts, such as, for example, the ability to interact with that survey data through natural language. You don't have to go through CSV files and so on and so forth anymore, right? You can use natural language to interact with that survey data. That's the first immediate quick win. The second is you can test marketing messages, right? If you want to develop a marketing story or marketing value prop, you can test that message with the synthesized persona. Number three advantage is that very often what happens is when you create a survey, you're in a rush, you have a bunch of open-ended questions, and then after the survey is done and you have the data, you want to ask follow-up questions. Without that, you're not able to do that. With this, actually, and we see here as an example, you are able to have follow-up questions. So for example, what you see here is a synthesis of a persona called a developer, and you are able to interact with that persona and ask follow-up questions. How has GitHub Copilot impacted your coding productivity? If you missed to put that in the survey, you can actually do that as a follow-up question with that synthesized persona. And the impact is around 60% improvement in terms of productivity for those researchers that is in that research and insight team. So it's a drastic improvement in terms of their core productivity. This took only a few weeks to develop. You might think it's a 6 months or a year project, a few weeks to develop. Now, a lot of the use cases that I was describing before are only possible when the LLM or the large language model that is used to cope with that content is specific to a set of knowledge. In this case, this is where we see the power of iProva, which is training that LLM model specifically in the content that is very much R&D and invention oriented. So we're really excited about the partnership we have with iProva, and iProva is also available through the Azure Marketplace. So that gives a very quick way for all of our enterprise customers worldwide to have access to this set of innovation, to have access to this set of products and services in an easily contractable and transactionable way. This is the Azure Marketplace where some of our top partners expose the solution. But without any further ado, let me actually bring in Andrea Constantine to show you in more details what is within iProva Gen AI infused tool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Over the next few minutes, I will present to you the state of the research and innovation space, and I will also introduce how iProva can solve some of the main challenges that we see there. So, over the last 2 decades, we have seen an exponential increase in the volume of scientific and technological knowledge. And given this huge amount of data that we have accumulated, please take 2 seconds to think what would be the impact on how we actually produce inventions and how we innovate. Well, on one hand, we can expect that now the context is ripe for major advances, because as Newton said, we can stand on the shoulder of giants. But what the data shows is that we actually observe declining disruptiveness of science and technology. So papers and patents, they tend to break a lot less with the past work in ways that could bring new developments for science and technology. There is less novel work, and of course, there is less likely to have innovation that connects distinct different areas of knowledge. This is how we end up with such headlines. Papers and patents are becoming less disruptive. Patents, they try to use more of a combinatorial process. We have less new codes that are being published, and then we are faced with a burden of knowledge. The data shows that over time, all industries and all domains of science are impacted by this decline in disruptiveness over the 50 years. So on average, we tend to have many more documents that are published and that are consolidating in nature. But if we look a little bit more in detail, we can see that the highest increase is actually happening in terms of published volume for low disruptive research, and then the disruptive research itself is actually constant. This means that it's increasingly difficult to find the good signal in the sea of information that is out there. These trends are typically associated with 3 main citation behaviors. When we study how inventors and researchers study each other, we see that they tend to cite increasingly old work. This means that they have some difficulty to keep up with the speed of knowledge and at which the knowledge is developed. They also tend to cite themselves and cite increasingly less diverse areas. So they tend to focus to be siloed in their own knowledge. Even though the knowledge space is large, they work with narrow lenses. So this is where iProva steps in. As it turns out, innovation is often a serendipitous process. The triggers that ignite the fire of invention rely on chance encounters and the unexpected connections that we make. So how can we actually have this process be less random? This is not an easy task, and that's why we actually can use the modern developments of AI and machine learning. So we start by collecting all possible sources of published science, like papers and patents, and we process them using algorithms to extract the main triggers that could enable future inventions. The idea is to be able to connect these triggers to the right person, to the right inventor, at the right time. After we do the processing on our database, we also work on our database of documents, of course. We also work with a large set of inventions. And from that set, we actually distill how the invention can work, what are the typical patterns that allow us to have the best connections. This is going to produce candidate connections that typical inventors can review, they can interact with, they can have access to various invention triggers, and then, of course, they interact and refine the whole process. If we are to imagine that we are a chef, and then we actually have access to the same ingredients as everybody else, then we will end up having the same tasting dishes in the end. So the secret would be to have access either to triggers, to ingredients that come from distant culinary cuisines, or to something new. And this is what is going to allow us to produce more novel inventions. In the end, the AI can also help us to formulate the final inventions, to evaluate them against various factors like state of the art or the market relevance. For introducing a couple of our tools, this is what we can start with. In order to detect relevant triggers in the knowledge space, we built the Opportunity Atlas. This allowing inventors the exploration of the large space that is published there for science and technology, the exploration of distant domains, and then the easy access to the most relevant triggers. The documents that we process, they are all appended with information related to the top problems that can be solved, the main technological advances that can be used, and then this is going to allow for an easier match between possible problems and solutions. We can also use AI to generate possible candidate connections. So the inventors, the researchers themselves, they can start with a piece of information that we offer, and then they can build connections around it, or they can use the system to find the best connections as well. There is always a point where the user can refine the concepts, they can increment, they can ask the AI, for example, to bring supportive components if they want to change something in their idea or target new properties. In the end, we also offer this evaluation for the concepts where we have a large database of published patents, so we can actually see how the new concept is related to the state of the art and have AI that is going to interpret what part of the concept can be worked upon and improved. Thank you.